Back in 2018, I spent a lot of time ice fishing. If you've never done it, it's incredibly, peaceful, but it can be isolating. I had a small portable blackout tent, essentially a small hut that keeps the wind out. One Tuesday in late December, I headed out to a lake about 40 minutes from my house. It was a weeknight, so I was the only person on the ice. I set up about 200 yards from the shore. By 6 p.m., it was pitch black. The only sound was the occasional boom of the ice shifting. A natural sound, but it always makes your heart jump. Around 8 p.m., I heard a different sound. It wasn't the ice. It was a faint, rhythmic tapping on the outside of my tent. I froze. I assumed it was just the wind whipping a loose strap, so I ignored it. But then the tapping moved. It went from the back of the tent, slowly around to the side, then stopped right at the zipper of the door. I whispered a, "Hello?" No response. I unzipped the flap just a crack and peered out with my headlamp. The white beam cut through the falling snow, but there was nobody there. However, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There were bare footprint sensations in the snow. Not boots, but the distinct shape of human toes, leading from the dark tree line directly to my tent. I quickly zipped the door back up and grabbed my fillet knife. That's when I heard it. A low, raspy breathing right against the fabric of the tent, inches from my head. A voice, barely a whisper, said, "It's so much warmer in there." I didn't wait. I burst out of that tent, screaming at the top of my lungs, and bolted for my truck. I didn't even look back until I was behind the wheel with the doors locked. In the rearview mirror, I saw a tall, gaunt figure standing perfectly still next to my tent, just watching me. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, the person was gone. They found a pile of frozen wet clothes hidden in the brush nearby. To this day, I wonder how long that person had been out there in the sub-zero temperatures, watching me through the thin fabric of my tent. In the winter of 2020, I rented a small cabin in the Cascade Mountains. I wanted total silence, no internet, no distractions. The cabin was tiny, just a studio layout with a lofted bed, and it was about 3 miles from the nearest neighbor. On the third night, a massive snowstorm rolled in. The wind was howling so loudly against the cedar planks that it sounded like people screaming. Around 11 p.m., I was sitting at the small kitchen table when I heard a heavy thump on the deck. I figured it was just a large branch falling from a pine tree, so I didn't get up. A few minutes later, I heard a sound that made my heart drop. It was the distinct creak of a floorboard, but it came from the deck right outside the sliding glass door. I turned off my lamp so I could see out into the darkness. At first, I saw nothing but blowing snow. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized there was a man standing perfectly still on the deck, less than a foot away from the glass. He was wearing a thin windbreaker and no gloves. He was just staring at the door handle. I didn't want to escalate things, so I stayed in the shadows and watched. He reached out, grabbed the handle, and tried to pull. When it didn't budge, he didn't get frustrated. He just stood there for 5 minutes, unmoving. Then he started lapping at the glass with his tongue, leaving a long, wet streak on the window that immediately began to freeze. I grabbed my phone to call 911, but I had 0 bars. I was totally on my own. I watched as the man walked off the deck and disappeared around the side of the cabin. I thought maybe he was gone, but then I heard a rhythmic scratching coming from the wall, right behind my head. It sounded like someone was trying to peel the siding off the house with their fingernails. I grabbed a heavy iron poker from the fireplace and yelled, "I'm armed! Get out of here!" The scratching stopped. Silence. Then a voice came from right outside the thin wooden wall, sounding disturbingly calm. "I can see your breath through the vents, Leo." The fact that he knew my name absolutely paralyzed me. I hadn't told anyone but the owner where I was. I stayed awake all night in the middle of the room, holding that poker. Every time I drifted off, I'd hear a soft tap on a different window. First the kitchen, then the loft, then the bathroom. He was circling the cabin over and over. When the sun finally came up, I dug my car out and left immediately. I called the cabin owner later that day to tell him what happened. He sounded confused and told me he hadn't even rented the cabin out to anyone named Leo. The booking was under my middle name, which I never use. It turns out the owner's son, who had a history of stalking and lived in the woods nearby, had been checking the booking logs on his dad's computer. He wasn't looking for a tenant, he was looking for someone who would be alone in a storm. A few years ago, I was driving home late on a Sunday night in mid-December. A massive lake effect snowstorm had hit, and the highway was a disaster. About 20 miles from my exit, traffic came to a complete dead halt. There had been a multi-car pileup a few miles ahead, and the police had closed all lanes. I was stuck in my sedan, surrounded by whiteout conditions. For the first hour, it wasn't so bad. I had half a tank of gas, a podcast playing, and the heater was blasting. But as the second hour passed, the line of cars became a graveyard of idling engines and falling snow. I was in the far left lane, right against the concrete median. To my right was a large semi-truck, and behind me was a beat-up white van. Because of the snow piling up on my windows, I had to periodically crack the door and brush it off just to see out. Around 1 a.m., I noticed the driver of the white van behind me get out of his vehicle. He was a tall guy in a heavy parka with the hood pulled way down. I watched him in my rear-view mirror as he walked up to the car behind him, talked to the driver for a second, and then moved to the next car. I figured he was just bored or asking if anyone knew how much longer we'd be stuck. Eventually, he made it to my window. I rolled it down about an inch. He leaned in close. I couldn't see his face because of the shadow of his hood, and asked in a very flat voice, "Hey man, my heater just gave out. Mind if I sit in your passenger seat for a bit to warm up?" Instinctively, I felt a massive surge of nope. It was 10 degrees out, and if his heater was out, he'd be in serious trouble. But something about his posture was off. He was standing too close to the door, almost leaning his weight against it. I lied and told him my car was acting up too, and I was trying to save gas. He didn't move. He just stared through the gap in the window. After a long silence, he said, "You have a lot of nice stuff in that back seat, Derek." My heart stopped. My name wasn't on the outside of my car. Then I realized my mail was sitting on the back seat, and my name was printed in large letters on a package I had picked up earlier. I rolled the window up immediately. He didn't walk away. He stood there, and I heard a metallic click. He was quietly lifting the handle of my rear door, trying to see if it was unlocked. Thank God I always keep my doors locked. I looked in the rear-view mirror and saw something even worse. The van he had come from? The engine was running, and I could see the exhaust pipes pumping out thick steam. His heater wasn't broken. He stayed there for 30 minutes, just standing by my rear door. occasionally tapping a coin against the glass. Ting, ting, ting. He knew I couldn't go anywhere. I was boxed in by the median, the semi-truck, and his van. Finally, the traffic started to inch forward. I didn't even wait for the car in front of me to fully move. I squeezed past, nearly clipping the median. As I drove away, I saw him in the mirror, slowly walking back to his van. He didn't look disappointed. He just stood in the middle of the highway watching my tail lights disappear into the snow. I later found out that a few cars had been broken into during that specific traffic jam, but nothing was stolen. The police think the person was looking for something or someone specific. I never travel alone in the winter without a dash cam anymore. As the winter months continue and the nights stay long, let these stories be a reminder that the cold isn't the only thing you should be worried about when you're alone. Whether you're out on the ice, staying in a remote rental, or just sitting in your car, waiting for traffic to move, always stay aware of your surroundings. Because in the dead of winter, someone might be looking for more than just a way to stay warm. If you have a true horror story of your own, be sure to send it in at the email address on screen. Stay safe out there, and thanks for watching.